There is a photograph, widely circulated in Spanish media, of Princess Leonor standing on the deck of the training ship Juan Sebastián de Elcano in January of 2025, wind in her hair, uniform buttoned to the collar, about to depart on a 6-month naval voyage that would take her across the Atlantic and back. It is, by most accounts, a striking image, composed, dutiful, entirely in command of herself. What the photograph cannot tell you, and what no photograph of Leonor ever really can, is what she was thinking in that moment, whether she wanted to be there, whether some part of her wished she were doing something else entirely with her early 20s, the way most young women her age are allowed to do. That gap, between what we can see of Leonor and what we cannot possibly know about her, is the entire subject of this script. Because the question in the title, Crown versus Happiness, is not a question this video can actually answer. No one outside Leonor's own inner life can answer it. What this script can do, honestly, is lay out exactly what the structure of her life demands of her, exactly what has been given up and what has been gained, and let you sit with the tension yourself, rather than pretending to know what's going on inside the head of a 20-year-old woman none of us has ever met. Let's start with what is actually, verifiably true about the shape of Leonor's life so far, because the facts alone tell a story worth taking seriously. Leonor was born on the 31st of October, 2005, and became heir presumptive to the Spanish throne the following decade, when her father ascended as King Felipe VI in June of 2014. She was 8 years old. From that point forward, nearly every major decision about her education, her extracurricular activities, her public appearances, and eventually her military service and university enrollment, has been made within the framework of preparing her for a role she did not choose and cannot decline. This is worth sitting with directly, because it is easy to state as a fact and much harder to actually absorb. Leonor has never had, and by the design of a constitutional monarchy, will never have, the experience of deciding for herself whether she wants the job she is being trained for. Spain's system of succession does not offer an opt-out. She could, in theory, formally renounce her claim to the throne, and Spanish constitutional scholars have discussed that possibility in the abstract, but nothing in her public conduct across her entire life suggests she has ever seriously considered it, and no source, official or unofficial, has ever reported that she has. What we're left with is a young woman whose entire adult trajectory has been mapped out since childhood, not by her own choosing, but by an accident of birth order and a constitution that was ratified in 1978, decades before she existed. Consider the concrete shape of what that has meant in practice. At 18, on the same day she turned 18, Leonor swore an oath of allegiance to the Spanish Constitution before the Congress of Deputies, a legal requirement for the heir to the throne, not a choice. At the same age, most young people are choosing their first apartment, their first real independence from their parents, their first taste of making decisions with genuinely private consequences. Leonor spent that year, and the 2 years following it, inside a military barracks in Zaragoza, then aboard a naval training ship, then at an air academy in Murcia, living under a level of institutional structure that few 20-year-olds anywhere in the developed world experience. She has consistently declined the modest cadet salary offered to her fellow trainees, not because Zarzuela required it of her, exactly, but because the royal household determined, and she accepted, that her training should be understood as institutional preparation rather than paid employment, a framing that quietly reinforces the idea that nothing about her life, even something as ordinary as a paycheck, can be treated as simply hers. She has no publicly confirmed romantic relationship. This is worth pausing on, because gossip outlets across Spain and beyond have speculated relentlessly about her private life, floating names, floating relationships, treating rumor as though it carries the same weight as fact. None of it holds up to scrutiny. As of this recording, there is no confirmed, on-the-record relationship in Leonor's life, and the appropriate response to that absence is not to fill it with speculation, but to notice what it means that even the question of who, if anyone, she might love has become a subject of public fascination and public commentary, whether she wants it to be or not. That level of scrutiny extends into details that would be unremarkable for anyone else and become newsworthy simply because they involve her. Her choice of university, reported earlier this year, was framed by multiple outlets as a negotiation between what she wanted to study and what her father, and by extension the institutional expectations built around the crown, seemed to prefer. Her choice of which car to be seen driving, which friends to be photographed with, which weekend activities to participate in, all of it carries a weight that has nothing to do with the activity itself and everything to do with what it might be read to symbolize about the future of the Spanish monarchy. Even the university she'll attend starting this September was chosen, according to Spanish reporting on the decision, with security as what one source called the preferent criterion, the primary deciding factor, ahead of academic prestige, ahead of personal preference, ahead of nearly anything else that might normally guide an 18 or 20-year-old's choice of where to spend the next 4 years of her life. Read that fact slowly, because it says something important. Even the most basic, most personal decision a young adult makes, where to go to college, was filtered first through the question of how to keep her safe from a level of public exposure most people will never have to think about at all. Now, against all of that, it would be dishonest and reductive to present Leonor's life as simply a story of sacrifice, because the available evidence doesn't fully support that reading either, and a responsible account has to hold both possibilities at once. There is no confirmed public statement from Leonor herself expressing resentment, reluctance, or unhappiness about her role. Quite the opposite. In the public statements and speeches she has given, going back to her first address at 13 years old, she has consistently spoken about her role and her training in the language of honor, duty, and privilege, describing her military service, in the words attributed to official coverage of her departure from that chapter, as something she entered fully aware of the discipline and sacrifice it would require, and deeply conscious of the honor involved. It is entirely possible, and arguably more likely than not, that Leonor experiences her life not primarily as a cage but as a calling, the way plenty of people in demanding, high-responsibility roles, from surgeons to soldiers to heads of state, describe their work: exhausting, all-consuming, occasionally isolating, and also genuinely meaningful to them. The instinct to assume that a life this structured must be a life of quiet suffering says as much about our own values, our own attachment to individual freedom and self-determination as the highest good, as it does about anything we actually know about how Leonor experiences her own circumstances. She may love flying. She may have found something in the discipline of military training that felt less like confinement and more like purpose. We simply do not know, and this script is not going to pretend otherwise by dressing up speculation as insight into her inner life. What we can talk about honestly, though, is the structural reality that surrounds her, independent of how she personally feels about it, because that structure is observable in a way her emotions are not. The Spanish monarchy exists within a political culture that includes an organized, vocal Republican movement, particularly strong in Catalonia and the Basque Country, and a public memory of her grandfather Juan Carlos's departure from Spain in 2020 amid financial scandal, an episode that still shadows the institution's legitimacy in the eyes of a meaningful share of the Spanish public. Leonor has had to build her adult identity inside that shadow, managing a relationship with her grandfather that is real but visibly constrained, never fully repudiating him, never fully embracing him publicly either, walking a line that very few 20-year-olds anywhere would know how to navigate. She has also watched her mother, Queen Letizia, absorb sustained public criticism throughout Leonor's entire childhood and adolescence, criticism that has ranged from substantive to deeply personal, and she has grown up inside a family that has had to develop what amounts to a formal strategy for managing public silence, choosing carefully when to speak and when not to, because every word carries institutional weight. That is not a normal environment for anyone to come of age in, regardless of how well-adjusted, disciplined, or genuinely committed to the role a given individual turns out to be. There is also the matter of time, which is worth naming plainly because it is one of the more concrete costs of her position. Leonor has spent the last 3 years, ages 18 through 20, inside a highly structured military training program most of her peers will never experience, and she is now moving directly into 4 years of university study that will run alongside, not instead of, a growing calendar of institutional duties, foundation ceremonies, award presentations, meetings with heads of state, speeches that require preparation and research into each honoree's biography, a pace of public engagement that shows every sign of accelerating rather than easing as she gets older. Compare that to Infanta Sofia, her younger sister, who is currently studying abroad, first in Lisbon and now moving to Paris, with what appears from public reporting to be a somewhat lighter institutional load, precisely because she is not the heir, and the contrast becomes clearer. The closer you sit to the actual center of dynastic responsibility, the less of your own time and your own choices remain fully your own. That is not a criticism of the monarchy as an institution, nor is it a claim that Leonor is uniquely burdened compared to other heirs across Europe, several of whom, from Princess Elizabeth of Belgium to Princess Amalia of the Netherlands, are navigating strikingly similar combinations of military preparation and university study at almost exactly the same moment in their lives. It is simply an honest observation about what the job actually requires, stripped of the ceremonial language that usually surrounds it. So where does that leave the question posed by this video's title? Crown versus happiness assumes those two things are necessarily in conflict, that duty and fulfillment sit on opposite ends of some scale, and that assumption, however intuitive it feels from the outside, may simply be the wrong frame. It's entirely possible that Leonor's happiness, whatever that word actually means for her, is not something located outside her role, waiting to be reclaimed once the crown's demands are satisfied, but something she is actively building inside the structure she was born into, the way people across countless demanding vocations build genuine meaning inside constraints they didn't choose. It's also entirely possible, and there is no way for anyone outside her immediate circle to know which is closer to the truth, that she experiences real private cost, real moments of wanting an ordinary life that will simply never be available to her, alongside whatever sense of purpose she's found in the role. Human beings are rarely one thing or the other. They hold both. What we owe Leonor, in trying to tell her story honestly, is the humility to admit that the inside of her experience is not ours to narrate, however much footage exists of her in uniform, however many speeches she has given, however many photographs capture her looking composed on the deck of a ship or the wing of a training aircraft. The crown is real, and its demands are documented, extensive, and in many ways more intense with every year that passes. Her happiness, whatever shape it actually takes, remains hers alone, unphotographed, unquoted, and rightly so.